everybody. It's a jolly fall day with Oxford. Oxford makes the plays seem right. Hi, everyone. We may have a bigger crowd than usual tonight, so just spread yourselves around and make yourself comfortable. You could order some of our house wine, Earl 17, courtesy of our resident vintner, Ben August. People should be showing up anytime now. Here's somebody. Dorothea, how are you?
How are you? Ready for a birthday party?
Good.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to have a big crowd tonight, I think. So we've thrown the doors open. So
oh, good.
Squeeze in. We've got to squeeze together. Oh, there's someone, Carolyn, over there in the corner. Hello. Nice to see you.
Earl.
Hey.
Bonner, hello, and Earl, our guest of honor, Earl.
The Earl.
And we'll know why. Yeah, everybody.
Actually, Edward de Vere is the guest of honor. It's his birthday.
It is.
Oh, I thought they meant your birthday. No.
April 12.
You were 473, Earl.
You look great.
I'm weathering well enough.
Yeah. So I was just saying we're going to have more people than usual. So everyone just gather at your tables, chat to each other. We'll be here at our table, but you can chat amongst yourself almost as if there is a chat button right there in front of you to do that with. You can pass notes to the table here. And if you have any questions, we'll try to get to them. No guarantees about that because I think this conversation is going to be all over the place in a good way. So I will be talking about that, asking a lot of dumb questions. So welcome everyone, get your favorite beverage. And what you were just talking about is this is Edward de Vere's birthday, right? What did
73. 473.
I thought we could open with a toast to him, right?
Yeah.
Got my Blue Boar Stein here. And how about everyone just, what are we doing here? Let's, do you have if everyone want to go around the table in a sentence or two? You can do this among your own tables. What does he mean to you? Why do we spend so much of our life on him? What would you say to him if he came swanning in the door right now? Would you have a question for him? Would you give him a gift? What would you give him? I would give him a copy of Thomas Loney's book and say, here's the guy about the thing.
Or a stack of books. A stack of books. Here, this is everything we've written on you. Article.
If I were to toast him as he walked in, I would thank him for opening up a vast, amazing world that I had no idea about. It's a world, it's a gift that keeps on giving. That's what I would say, Jonathan.
Honor?
Well, I was thinking what to appreciate. And because I taught piano for so many years, and I'm so interested in developing talent in children. And he had this wonderful early childhood education that I would ask him about it. And we've tried to delve into it. And of course, Stephanie Hopkins Hughes has done a wonderful job of digging up details. But of the many things we need to appreciate is that he was a beneficiary of this fabulous education and that he took to heart and that you see and to ask him more about that, if I could query him and what he did and the way he used it for the rest of his life is just an amazing thing and inspiring.
Dorothea? You your stack of books, but any more than that?
Yeah, my stack of books. I think I would want him to know that I love the sound of his words before I was really old enough to understand what they meant. And I was very puzzled about how a commoner had this point of view about ports and foreign lands as if he were a noble. And I would read these bios of Will of Stratford and I couldn't make them work. And I would ask adults, because adults know everything. And they would say, don't be silly, Dorothea. Of course, Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, but that didn't go away. And the feeling kept growing. And I didn't really run across him as the answer until I was in my 40s. And when I did, it was like this sense of vindication for me, and almost a burst of confidence that I had. I had known
Intuited something,
but I did not know who he was. So, yeah, that would be my thank you to him.
Yeah. I was thinking one thing, because we're often accusing people who have alternate Shakespeare candidates or accused of choosing their favorite person and then looking for evidence to support that person as if it's a cult of personality or something. And I was thinking, I've said this before, I don't really have any great personal attachment to Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. And if somebody with better credentials came up, which I don't see happening, I could drop him in favor of someone else. So what he means to me is he seems most likely to have written the works of Shakespeare. So to me, he's special because I think he's the mind behind the works of Shakespeare. Mm. And as I often say to Stratfordians, we're not that different. We love the works. We just have a disagreement about who the mind behind the works are. And I think he's the mind, I think. So, there's to you.
Cheers.
In fact, let's do what Stratfordians do. We've kidded how they constantly refer to him as Will, as if he's like their best buddy from next door. So, hey, Ed, good job. Did Earl disappear?
Earl.
I think Earl stepped away. I hope he's going to come back.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I'll send a carrier pigeon his way. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe he's gone to look at some of those fine whiskeys that are sitting on the windowsills back there.
Gone to look for the Earl 17 wine.
Maybe that's it.
So, so people, it's come up in recent conversations here talking about, this funny name comes up, Fisher's Folly, and talking about Oxford's circle of writers and friends, and the things are almost synonymous. I don't know much about this aspect of the Oxfordian story, so for the benefit of me, and under the theory that there are no dumb questions, just dumb people asking questions, I'm going to just start out and throw it out to you guys. What is this Fisher's Folly? Is it the name of a house or a piece of land? And Oxford bought it, but when and why and how long? Can we do a quick summary of that before getting into details?
I guess I would say that Fisher's Folly was a house that during Oxford's lifetime was a large and beautiful house with bowling alleys, gardens of pleasure, and the like that was on Bishopsgate, owned by Jasper Fisher, who was a goldsmith, head of the goldsmiths, I think. And we don't know when Oxford first saw it. There is a record that Queen Elizabeth was there in early March of 1573 with the court. So Oxford may or may not have been with her. The house was perfumed for her. The coronet sounded, and she spent her time talking to Ambassador de la Mole about her potential engagement to the Duke of Alençon. So that's perhaps the first time he saw it. He buys the house in 1580, within 5 days of the earthquake. He renovates it, and he is there on and off for the next 8 years. Many people think that he had a coterie of writers, musicians who joined him there, who came and went. Many people think that some of these people were also spies. So
and you will have some information on that.
We'll have some information on that.
Interesting connection. Okay. Tom Bonner, do you know much about it? I'm lame in this department, so.
Well, I think Dorothea has summed up very well what we know about Fisher's Folly and Oxford's purchase of it. I just wanted to clarify. Apparently, they used to say the date was 1584. And, good.
It's back.
One of your customers is back, Jonathan. That's nice.
Okay, good.
And apparently the purchase was done in 2 transactions, one in 1580 and one in 1584. Is that correct, Dorothea?
I think what you're thinking of, the house that's on that faces Bishopsgate, he bought in 1580. I got a photo on my phone I can show you, but there's like 4 acres in the back. that extends behind it, and that's the part he bought in 1584.
Oh,
Okay,
so it
Yeah,
was a
so
good
it was
piece of
two
land.
transactions of adjoining pieces of property.
wonderful. Thank you.
So Earl,
Yeah.
I'd asked a bunch of dumb questions. What is this Oxford Circle of Writers and Fisher's
Oh.
Folly? And Dorothea gave a good summary. Do you have anything to add before we get into the details?
I love this period of time in Oxford's life from between 1579, 1580, and 1590 in that range. I just wish Roland Emmerich had put anonymous in that era when he was living at Fisher's Folly and surrounded with his, entourage of writers. I mean, you think of the people he received dedications from during that period of time that were recognized excellent writers of that era that were all connected in various ways, from John Lyly, who's plays and whose Euphues novels he clearly inspired Shakespeare's works, but the allegorical plays that he wrote, plays like Endymion and Sappho and Phao and Campaspe, that were directly related to what was going on at court. Those were court dramas performed by the Earl of Oxford's boys, who were combined with the boys of Paul's and the chapel boys, and so in mid 1580s they were putting on amazing plays, and Lyly was the manager of that company. And then Anthony Munday's right there. He's dedicating Zalato, which is a source for Much Ado About Nothing, and dedicating 2 or 3 works to Oxford during that period of time. Another great translator. And then you've got Thomas Watson dedicating Hecatopathia in 1582. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. John Southerns, Pandora, dedicated to Oxford. All of these people have cross connections with each other. It's just a phenomenal period of time. And
So
one
when
of
you
the
think
people that I just want to mention, one in passing that's not commonly known to many Oxfordians, is the role of Abraham Fleming, who was described in 1580 as the amanuensis for the Earl of Oxford. So he was with him. He was his literal secretary beyond whatever services Lyly and Munday performed as his secretaries, as his servants. But Fleming was an amazing scholar in his own right. And he was very involved in the late 1580s in the rewrite and the expansion of Hollingshead Chronicles, which I just learned recently, that he was working with Arthur Golding, and the two of them basically doubled the volume. They added 1.5 million words to the 1587 edition, and it's cataloged under Fleming's name. Now, the reason Fleming is so interesting is that there's a reference in an antiquarian's book from the mid 18th century or 17th century by the name of Francis Peck, who says that he has Fleming's papers, and one among those papers is a pleasant conceit by Vere, Earl of Oxford, concerning the coming up of a mean gentleman at court circa 1580, which is likely to be Christopher Hatton, and many Oxfordians think this is probably the first version of what comes down to be Twelfth Night, the question of Malvolio and his associations with Hatton. So it's an incredible period of time, and the circle of artists and writers around Oxford was just it is endless. You're forced to read all these people.
So put it this way, is right around that time, he would have been around 30, right in the prime of life, on fire with inspiration from having just been to Italy and Italian culture and theater. Probably still had a lot of energy and wasn't tired and lame, physically lame by that point. So
And in
this is him
love.
on fire.
And in love, Jonathan.
Yeah, and
Love.
away from his wife, who he felt sort of tied to, so he's sort of free to go wild, basically.
And in the Tower for a period of time, and exiled from court for 2 years during that time. I think, and that the circle of writers and the intensity of the efforts that were going on with his theatrical efforts in the early 1580s, in some regards, was compensation for the fact that he was exiled from court. He was not there for the better part of 2 years until he was forgiven in 1583 and then later reunited with Anne, or just before that. So I think that there was a ferment of activity going on in some regards in reaction to and in response to the fact that he was no longer a persona grata at court.
So this was a high point for him, really, if you think about it.
Both low and high. I think Timon of Athens was written in 1584. There's a reference to an Athenian misanthropos biting on the stage, and And the same comment that refers to Cassandra, a character probably from the history of Agamemnon and Ulysses, performed by the Earl of Oxford's boys at court in 1584, and a reference to Diogenes, who was a character in Campaspe, which was also published in 1584. So I think he was writing really a bitter satiric material. At the same time, he's creating comic material. I mean, it was a ferment time. I mean, most people think Timon's later, but there is a clear reference to a 1584 Timon. And if you think Oxford being a downwardly mobile, nobleman at that point, he sold, I think, over a dozen estates in 1584 alone to finance those acting companies he was supporting and the music company he supported. And, so it was an incredible time of artistic endeavor. At the same time, he was going into financial ruin.
Wow. Can we get into, I think, Dorothea, you had some images about what this place looked like and where it was located.
I thought that might be kind of interesting to take a journey in two time frames simultaneously, which is back to 1580 and today, just a couple of years ago. So, can you guys see my phone okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Does it work for you? All right. So there we are. There we are. Everybody
out the window.
Invited. If you look through the window, you'll see us sitting at the table.
Hello.
And you're welcome to come in the door and gather around and let's see where we go. So if you were to make the trip today, you might arrive opposite Fisher's Folly and Liverpool Station. Now, Liverpool Station, obviously a very busy place, but back in 1580, you need to imagine that there was, instead of a train station, an asylum for people who were not in their right minds. They had their head shaved. They lived in dormitory type rooms. You could hear them shouting. You could perhaps find references if you were writing in King John, Henry V, to Henry VI and Lear, to Bedlam. It's in all of those plays. And
couldn't you also, like, if you were rich, pay and go look at all the
you might be able
for entertainment?
Or
If I could
study.
just jump in quickly. Some people may think we've gone to the north of England. It's Liverpool Street Station.
Oh, excuse me. Thank
London. Oh, good idea.
No worries.
Good point.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we're across from where it was, right?
Across, right. So in other words, if you were standing at Fisher's Folly's front gate, you would be looking at Bedlam. So where are we?
Yeah.
We are.
Oh, you've got a pointer. Good.
I've got a pointer. This is Bishopsgate. This that you see running this way, all those crenellations, and running this way is the Roman wall that surrounded London. It still stood in those days.
Oh.
Bedlam is here. There's a lovely church here, which is a Tudor church at that time. When we see it today, it's not the same. It's the same location, but not the same church. It was rebuilt in the early 1700s, St. Bolatov's. This right here is where there is an inn called the Pie. There is today a pub there called the Magpie, but it's a 19th century edition. If you go here, you will find the Papy, which was Francis Walsingham's home.
And he was the spy master.
The spy master.
Right.
If you go inside the city, you will find some of the locations that you might know Oxford from. And if you go all the way down here, cross, there's Oxford House right there. So that's one home in town. But this property right here is the 1580 Fisher's Folly, this L-shaped property.
Okay.
Which included 50 outbuildings, 30 kitchen gardens, 10 orchards, a reservoir, pipes of lead, a bowling alley, and tenements. This is the second piece that he bought, which extends the back of the property this way towards the Boar Tavern, which is down the street. If you look up here, there's an artillery field where The guys who guarded the tower used to send off artillery on Thursdays. And then if you go up here, you will find the theater, and down a little further, I didn't highlight it, is the curtain. So I thought what we might do after kind of orienting everyone is take a look at.
So just to emphasize that point, so right near Edward de Vere's house is how far is he from these two key theaters?
10 minutes, 10-minute walk, much shorter if you're riding a horse.
So he's right in the center.
Yeah, it's 10 minutes. I walked it. It's 10 minutes. So he's very, very close to the theaters. Yes, to both of them. And he's very close to the spy master for the crown. But nothing in old London is very far, but this is outside the walls. And so therefore, I think also we have to say the Lord Mayor had no jurisdiction for anything that went on outside the walls, which is why it's probably a better house for him than Oxford House. So let's go, because we've got a lot to cover. If you were looking for Fisher's Folly today, if you come out of the station and you go, all right, I'm looking for it, where is it? You would see a site that looked like this. And you go, holy cow, this does not look like Tudor. This does not look like, where am I going to find a piece of Fisher's Folly? You might proceed down a little alley and you might find this beautiful little park with planed trees, nice benches, and you might sit there, as my husband and I did. He's the guy in the white sweater, and have a sandwich. And then, you might be me and you might go, there has to be something that tells people this was Shakespeare's house. Is there any clue? Is there any sign? Is there any way anyone who would be walking here looking for it would know? And it is in that picture. If you look very carefully, you will find a 12-foot high stainless steel statue with a breastplate with blue diamonds winking on it of a knight in full armor carrying not a sword,
spear,
but a spear. So for those of you all ever want to go find Fisher's Folly, find this park, find that knight, and you will be there.
So through sheer serendipity, at the place where some of Shakespeare's works may have been written, right on that land, they've put up this statue.
A statue of a knight shaking a spear. Yes, they did. Is that serendipity? I don't know. Okay, if we proceed looking for the theater, walking our 10 minutes up, we'll find ourselves in a neighborhood that I would call, a very trendy millennial neighborhood. And all that's left of the theater, which we could talk about a little bit, is this plaque. If you go to the intersection of Curtain Road and New Inn Yard Street and Great Eastern Street, is a three-way intersection, and you walk about 200 paces north, you'll find the plaque. But I want Tom to tell us, because he's the only one that's actually lived there, why is it that all of these buildings from Oxford's time are no longer there? Why can't we find them, Tom?
Yeah.
Two major events, really. One was the Great Fire of 1666.
Yeah.
Which raged for something like 4 days, I believe, and wiped out something on the order of 3/4 of London at that time. It was then rebuilt, of course, which in a way sends the existing buildings lower and lower, in the buildings were put on top of the original foundations. And then the other awful event, of course, was the Blitz of 1914, the Second World War, where Hitler relentlessly bombed London night after night after night. And I went to London University in 1968, and I remember very clearly, even at that time, so we're talking, 28 years later or something, seeing bombed out areas everywhere, including some of the most fashionable areas. And there were signs on the walls saying bomb shelter this way. So even though it was well after the end of the Second World War, all the signs, all the terrible destruction was a part of everyday life. And there's a very funny saying about the English sense of humor, where after one particular bombing, there were two shops next door, and one said open as usual, and the other one said more open than usual.
So we're just lucky that anything.
Those
exists,
two, in a, yes, but there's nothing remaining of the Tudor times, the standing, if you will. You have to dig down.
So the theater, I mean, I think what's really interesting, Newington Butts was probably the first theater. The theater is the second, even though it says it was the first, it may very well be the second. It was octagon shaped, which is really kind of an interesting shape with a stage that then went into the center. And it was on the same, it was on a property that was in the old priory of St. John's Holywell and built by James Burbage because he lived on Holywell Street in 1576. So one side of it, to understand what it looked like, one side of it was the common sewer for the area. Just hold on to that thought. On the same property was a cattle pen, stables, a great pond, and to the south, an oat barn that belonged to Oxford's childhood friend and fellow ward, the Earl of Rutland. 3 galleries around an open yard. For a penny, you could stand. For 2 pennies, you could get in one of the galleries. For 3 pennies, you could rent a stool and sit in one of the galleries. But of course, if you had a lot of money, you could get an even better seat. Of course, this is a Chamberlain men's performed there in the 1590s, but they moved to the second theater, which is a little further south, called the Curtain.
So if you were richer, you could have a nicer seat while you're
You could
smelling.
have a nicer seat, maybe even on the stage. Yeah, much more comfortable than standing. So
While you're smelling sewage, yeah.
While you're smelling sewage. So this is the theater where there were a bunch of landlord issues, which is why they moved to the Curtain. And then in dark of night, December 28, 1598, a group of carpenters came together, dismantled this building, every single piece of it, loaded it on barges, shipped it across the Thames, and it eventually was rebuilt into the globe, right? And
Dorothea,
Yes.
some people are passing notes over here that
Okay.
they got in late. Could you show them the initial map again and sort of
Go back to the other
that?
map? Sure, we can do that.
That's what it's
Run
like
through it
now.
really
but-
quick. I'm going to run through it really quickly
Yeah,
because
yeah,
there's
thank
so
you.
much to cover here. Okay, this is Bishopsgate, an actual gate in an actual wall. The wall is Roman. There are pieces of it left. You can see it today.
I've seen
City of London Museum, you can see it really well. If you were to leave the City of London, which was in the jurisdiction of the Lord Mayor and on his laws about theater and other lewd behavior, you would pass through. There's a church, St. Boletoff's here. There is the Insane Asylum of Bedlam here that shows up in 4 or 5 of Shakespeare's plays. This is the Pie Inn, which was owned by Edward Adeline's family. There's another house here on the corner. And then this L-shaped property is the 1580 purchase with the beautiful house that had the molding in there, the tennis courts, the orchards, the tenements. And this piece, Oxford purchased in 84, which takes him all the way back on his own property where he can drop in and the boar heads in is like right off the page over here. Going back north, this is a 10-minute walk to the theater, about an 8-minute walk to the Curtain. Going
So
back.
there's Edward de Vere right there between Edward or Alan's house, theaters. He's right in the center of everything.
He's right in the center. And then when he marries Elizabeth Trenton, they move to Hackney, which is off the page here, but it's about the same distance. It's about 10 minutes in either direction. So he was never very far from those two theaters. One other point of interest, Oxford House is way down here in the corner, but it's within the city. Therefore, the Lord Mayor can tell you what to do. And this is Francis Walsingham's the Papy, which is the chief spy master. So when we talk about stories about perhaps there was a spy ring also going on within Fisher's Folly, which is a theory. I think there's no proof of that, but certainly a theory with Christopher Marlowe. So hope that's helpful to people who are looking for parking spaces or getting in. Whoops. Okay. So if you were looking for the curtain is a little further south on Bishopsgate, closer to Fisher's Folly. The curtain was built in 1577, about 500 feet to the south of Fisher's Folly. It was a rectangular building, and it housed the Lord Chamberlain's men from 1597 to 1599 because of the problems with the landlord at the theater. And then they leave for the Globe in 1599. And that's the end of the story for the Lord Chamberlain's men and these two theaters. It was used until 1624, interestingly enough. And then, of course, the theaters closed down and it fell to ruin. Were you to go there today looking for it, you would find it is a construction site underneath a 37-story luxury apartment building called The Stage in Shoreditch. Its address is 18 Hewitt Street. Even though it is on Bishopsgate, you would find the address at Hewitt, 18 Hewitt Street. Technically, it's Hackney. It is between Holywell Lane and Hearn Street. So if you were trying to find it, and this is why you might want to find it, because while they were digging this project, they discovered in 2012 that there is an archaeological site at the bottom. Tom just explained why Tudor sites are underground. Well, this is lucky because they found the Curtain Theater. They found its stage. They could tell that it was rectangular, which they didn't know. They found bird whistles. They found clay pipes. They found money boxes. They found money. They found tunnels and galleries of the original theater. My understanding, and I went back and looked again, and I can't find the information, but I think the developers are required to preserve it under glass, just like next to Oxford's house, when Bloomberg built that huge Oxford house, a big building that Bloomberg built, he found a temple to Mithras while they were digging. And so the temple to Mithras underneath the Bloomberg building on Cannon Street is open to the public as a historic site. And I think the plan is to have the Curtain Theater open also.
Good.
So hopefully when I say give you the address, you may actually want to visit. And now those are all my trip. Earl also has some.
Tell us your story, Earl. This is great.
Yeah. So
Show us
we're
the
gonna
first slide, Dorothea.
we're gonna switch gear, and we're gonna get a little further exploration of Fisher's Folly that Earl and some of his colleagues did. So Earl, take it away.
Yes. Well,
and before you do that, Earl, I'm just going to jump in for the people who've come in a bit late. We've been talking about Fisher Folly as sort of that time period was sort of Oxford on fire. He was in his 30s. He was surrounded by writers. He was near the theaters. He had just come back from Italy, inspired by the Renaissance, basically there. And he was away from his wife, who he didn't want to be married to probably. And so he was really on fire at this point, creativity, you think. So this is the house we're talking about in the land. Go, Earl. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, in 2013, a friend and a woman who's no longer with us, Anne Zackel, organized the De Vere Trail Tour, in which almost 30 American Oxfordians traveled to England and toured for a week together. And it was a marvelous trip. It was written up in the Shakespeare Oxford newsletter, in case you were interested in looking back at the issues back in 2013. And on the day that we were touring at Westminster, we met up with Kevin Gilvert, who's pictured in the center with his Oxford colors on. And after touring Westminster, a small subset of our group gathered around Kevin, and he led us down the Thames and then across to the Strand. And then we got on double-decker buses, and then we went across town a bit, and we ended up at Liverpool Station. And then Michael Morse took over. Now, Michael's an attorney. At the time, he was a board member of the Shakespeare Fellowship. He helped actually write the bylaws of the existing Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. So he was an important colleague at that time. His wife, Stacy, is pictured right next to the map there as Devonshire Square. And there's Michael pointing with his finger in the location he thinks where we might be able to actually view the foundation of Fisher's Folly, which would, of course, be below ground, probably 10 to 20 feet below what is current ground level, given what Kevin has already, knew also. So we fanned out and began going into the little clubs and boutiques, and there was a supermarket just off of Bishopsgate Street that Stacy and Michael and Roger Stratman and I wandered into, and we saw a double door at the back, which led to an alleyway, we were sure. And with the proper approach to the security and the manager, we bribed our way into that alleyway. And there we are, Roger sitting there. There's Sonia Fox and Mary Berkowitz. There's other people there in this scene that are in these photographs. There's Michael and Roger, so pleased. And to the left, you see at the bottom is the foundation of Fisher's Folly, just in this alleyway. So if you show the next slide, Dorothea, you'll see the details that came from that we could see on that moss-covered, multi-layered brick structure. It was a wonderful moment. We were all so joyous. We were high-fiving it, and we felt we had actually reached a mecca of some sort, Later on, Michael would retrieve a few fragments of brick from that. He awarded one of those to me, which I have passed on to Tom Woosnam because it's a power brick. It should be in Ashland near the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And Tom and his family are brick collectors. So he's holding it up there. There we have a piece of Fisher's Folly.
From Fisher's Folly.
So it was a successful quest by a bunch of an eclectic group of romantics who thought, well, maybe there's a chance we might actually find something. So we were fortunate, Dorothea, in actually driving our way into the proper place where we could actually see what the construction was like. And Michael, of course, was all prepared to give the case that I was an archaeologist interested in brick construction in the Renaissance, to explain the fact that he had bricks in his bag.
I'm going to jump in and say Joella's here with us, saying I'm the one in the tan jacket and black and white stripe.
You met Joella was there, yeah. And, True Believers were captured with Kevin. It was just a wonderful way to spend the afternoon. But on a quixotic quest, which is actually realized in a literal sense. And we were quite edified to see that there. And thank you, Dorothea, for the map.
Oh, yeah, actually, Earl, you're going to turn us around.
Yes.
And send us back through the train station.
Let me throw in something. Ron is saying something that I just thinking myself. He says, a piece of the true bard. And I was thinking about last time we were here, thinking about Stratford.
So looking down,
let me finish my thought. Let me finish my thought. And we were talking about how utterly fraudulent Stratford on Avon is, and if people want to go, they can watch the video of that through the site. But they're saying here's Shakespeare's house, and it's all fake. But here, that literally was probably a bit of Shakespeare's house.
And Dorothea mentions, and this is the last slide we have, that is St. Botolph's Church, which is where Amelia Lanier was baptized and later married. And also where Stephen Gosson, the author of, a critical, screed against the theaters back in 1579, that's where he preached in the early 16th century. So it was a hot zone for people who were interested or opposed to theatrical productions. So
but it didn't look like this because this was built in 1728, but it's the site of that. Okay. Yeah. So I think that, that takes us through at least our geographic, trip through Fisher's Folly. But I think Bonner is going to tell us a little bit about the afterlife of Fisher's Folly.
Well, let's, before we get to that, Bonner, can we talk about what went on there during his time? Like they talk about a circle of writers.
Okay.
Who were they? I mean, what were they doing there? Could you just throw out names and describe what all this activity was going on there? And then Bonner can tell us about a really interesting bit of the after.
And I want to point out Earl's wonderful article that ended up being published in Gale, which is a big publication type of thing that was accepted for that, where you really delve into a lot of details that are pertinent to all of this. So,
oh, wonderful. You know, I mean, Lyly and you know, Munday, Watson, Spencer, they're all providing sources for Shakespeare. They're all writing and attributing things to each other. They're all working with each other, writing letters of commendatory letters in each other's publications. It was a hotbed, and I think John Lyly referred to that as going to drink from Homer's basin. That his patron was equivalent to Homer, who was gathering all the other spirited writers of that era around. And of course, the Euphuist novels that were coming out during that time, not just by Lyly, but also by, you know, Greene, Robert Greene. What a character he turns out to be. And I know Dorothea probably has something to share about Robert Greene. And I happen to think that he's a very, very shady character, and he might not even exist. But he dedicated Guidonius to the Earl of Oxford in 1584. And I studied that in my study of Timon of Athens, because there's two references to Timon in that Guidonius book, 1584, the same year that reference, the literary reference to the Athenian Misanthropos biting on the stage. So in other words, a Timon satire. Well, there are two references to Timon in Guidonius that was dedicated. And there are long passages that are very much echoing the certain precepts of William Cecil that end up in the precepts that Polonius passes on to Laertes. And one of the most important ones that is exactly opposite to what Cecil says. Cecil's precept says, no, do not allow your sons to travel south of the Alps, because if they do, they'll come back full of heresy, blasphemy, you know, and terrible ideas. They'll be converted to the old religion. And in Guidonius, the true teacher, the father who gives the son the best advice, says, you know, for education, the best thing is to travel. You know, the best thing is to go explore the world. This is where you'll learn character. You know, so the very interesting fact that Greene, of course, I mean, Pandosto is the source we assume for the Winter's Tale, and there's other connections, of course, in Greene's Groatsworth of Wit, which is a very fascinating and controversial piece of work. And the question of who was Will Monnox, who was allegedly there at the time of Greene's death. I mean, the whole thing about Robert Greene, very suspect. And I think Bob Prechter, Stephanie Hughes, you know, and others have questioned the true identity of Robert Greene. I think he's worthy of some further discussion here.
Other people are throwing out comments. I hear them from the sides of the room saying he exists. I agree. So it's not going to be settled here tonight. I'm going to say something about, you mentioned the euphuism.
Yeah, I think we should define.
Tom, could you define that? And Tom, you had a thought on that too.
So I'll take a stab at it.
Okay, you defined it, and Tom has a thought.
You know, it is, I think the best way for me to understand it, it is a form of rhetoric that is based on classical writers, classic Greek and Roman writers. It is a style of words that follows certain rules that were considered good writing for the ancients, and therefore euphists in the English language felt they should imitate those to create beautiful, flowing lyric lines that we know.
Big craze for a while, right? It was
exactly
a big fad. Right?
So you will find alliteration, you know, furrows of a fair face, or pairs of words, nouns or adjectives, where one letter is changed. The meaning obviously being different, but they are similar words. Nature and nurture is a pair, lover and liver, right? So there is a rhythm that's created. You find opposite words, salt and sweet, or poisoned and honey, or love and hate.
So things were really balanced.
Yes, there's a balance to it. And there's also, I mean, one thing that I think is, so I think of Lear when I think of this, which is the repetition, multiple repetitions of a simple word for emphasis. So
somebody just threw out the word paradox was another big part of it. Those 5 O's in a row in Lear, separated by the commas. Is that an Oxford O? It also is the emphasis that gives Lear's pain, right? The depth. And that's very euphistic. So this had a big influence on whoever Shakespeare was. Obviously.
Absolutely, it did.
The plays that have the most euphuistic style is Love's Labour's Lost and Much Ado About Nothing. Those are probably the two most euphuistic. The whole dialogues between Beatrice and Benedict, the wars of words between them, is the purest example of euphuistic commentaries, I think, in the canon. It's marvelous, but it's a rhetorical system that Dorothea has tried to describe, and it goes on, and it's excessive. It's very much excessive. And Euphues himself is a comic character. He's a satiric representation, so it's multi-layered. But there's chiasmus, there's bringing together, there's a contrast. It's a very balanced and rhetorically enriched text, very much so. And it was very popular at court in the 1580s also. If you didn't speak euphuistically, you weren't anybody important.
So interestingly, it was a big fad before Shakespeare of Stratford was writing. Tom, go.
So my contribution to this is that what strikes many people as a little odd is that the plays mentioned and others were supposed to have been written at the earliest about 12 years or so after John Lyly published his Euphues books. And it was a satirical take on Euphuism in Hamlet, Love's Labour's Lost, Much Ado About Nothing, Richard III. So it's a little strange that you would parody something that's possibly as old as 12 years. It doesn't quite make sense. So just for kicks, what I did was I thought, well, suppose somebody today was to do a similar thing and parody something from 12 years ago. So I looked up 2011's biggest pop culture moments. So this is what might be included, if I'm stating this clearly, in a playwright's rendition today satirizing something 12 years ago. They would be talking about the rise of Adele or the royal wedding between Prince William and Kate Middleton, Oprah's final episode, Harry Potter ending, Beyonce's baby announcement, and Kim Kardashian's divorce. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if somebody wrote a play referencing those things now, it would fall on deaf ears, I think.
We'd be rolling in the aisles at the humor.
There you go. Right. It just doesn't work.
Strangely, Shakespeare's always like 10 to 15 years behind the times, strangely enough. And of course,
perhaps the plays were written earlier. Maybe.
At Fisher's Folly, where all these people were gathering.
Just maybe.
By that time, it's really old news.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really
exactly. Yeah.
My mother used to tell of it was just one of the biggest jokes Bob Hope ever had when he would do his Bob Hope specials. Now that really is a long time ago, but it had just happened. And his joke, he started his monologue with saying, "Well, Eddie knew that it was over when Elizabeth brought home the asp." The audience just went wild. Now, if you said that to an audience today, I don't think anybody would have a clue what you were saying.
Right.
Connor, you have some other material on Fisher's Folly. I think you
do.
While you're finding it, I'm gonna try to synthesize all this, saying that what was going on in Fisher's Folly, this house, all these writers were connected to Oxford. The guy who invented euphuism was Oxford's secretary, right? John Lyly. They were all feeding off each other, like.
Got it.
There's a little book that has been ignored because it has something in it, and the connection is to Fisher's Folly that really connects in. So I've tried to set it out to in a PowerPoint so you can see this in my mother's book, which is her Oxfordian Vistas. If anybody doesn't have it, I bet most everybody does, but if you don't, just send me your address and I will mail you a copy for free. So, because this little book has a lot of interesting stuff in it, including a nice chapter on this, and that's where most of this material is from. But also Hank Whittemore's wonderful book, 100 Reasons. I always point out this book at each chance I get because I love this book. And he has a very, very nice overview of Anne Cornwallis, her book also. So in that, what it is, of course, is, as Dorothea has explained, he purchased the house. Oxford purchased the house in 1580 and the remaining acreage in 1584. Now, there is plenty of evidence that writers from London's literary circles lodged at the Folly, and the writers included, I'm sorry to be overview here, but Earl's already talked about them, including Thomas Nashe and Thomas Churchyard, and none other than Alan Nelson has Abraham Fleming in it, Arthur Golding, and Thomas Twin, who was a translator of note at the time. Oxford sold Fisher's Folly in the autumn of 1588 to William Cornwallis, a very distinguished family that actually was related to the Veres. From one of, I forget now which king of England, but they had good antiquity going for them. It was a very accomplished family, the Cornwallis. Of great interest is a manuscript that is associated with this particular family. On it, it says, Anne Cornwallis, her book. And here you have, that is exactly this, Anne Cornwallis, her book. Now, this would not be such a big deal were it not for the fact that this manuscript of 32 poems has a poem that is attributed to William Shakespeare. This poem appeared attributed to William Shakespeare in the book called The Passionate Pilgrim, which was published much later in 1599. And interestingly, the great experts of textual study believe that by far and away the better version of this poem, which is about nine or 10 verses, it's a pretty long work, that it is better, the better version is in Anne Cornwallis' notebook than in The Passionate Pilgrim, which is kind of corrupted. Her notebook is now in the Folger Shakespeare Library. Halliwell, it came from Halliwell Phillips. And then when the Folger ended up acquiring all of his manuscripts and books and stuff, that's why it's now in the Folger. Interestingly, Halliwell believed, and probably correctly, that this manuscript was copied. These different poems were copied between 1585 and 1590. Now, it wouldn't be such a big deal. Even more of a big deal is because in this manuscript is a poem that is attributed to the Earl of Oxford by the copyist herself, and another poem that is the famous echo verses by Anne Vavasor are right here, all copied out in somebody's hand.
And it even says Vavasor there.
Maybe. Now, in the book, in the Oxfordian Vistas book, are set out the names of all of these poems. And my mom did them in the first line in alphabetical order, which I guess is a way of doing that. I think we need to revisit all of this and set it out in the order that they appear in the notebook, and that can be done. And then if it's attributed to somebody, it's in brackets, of course, and if it's identified, like the one from Oxford is identified as Earl of Oxford, and the Anne Vavasor is identified as Anne Vavasor. The Shakespeare, which is right here, is identified is attributed to William Shakespeare, but on pretty good grounds because it popped up later as identified as William Shakespeare.
In the book, it's not identified as William Shakespeare, right?
No. But then he hadn't gotten into his pseudonym at that point. He hadn't published Vetus and Adonis yet.
He was.
This is the poem that when that thine eye hath chose the dame, and it was considered to be its great significance is that it may well be the earliest known record of Shakespeare's work in somebody's handwriting. However, this appeared earlier. It was really around 2000, early part of this century, that David Roper did, and I'm sure Earl knows all about this, found the single page of Titus Andronicus, which Orthodox believe it was done in 1595 by Henry Peacham's son. And I think David Roper argues very persuasively that the date is 1575, and it was done by the father, the older of the Peachams.
Oh, Bonner, somebody's asking here, why, well, let's repeat this. Why was the name William Shakespeare in brackets? Because in the book, it's not actually attributed to him. Right.
This is the ending, and this is the ending of it. That appears. This is the last three of the verses of the poem that is attributed, that later was identified as William Shakespeare in The Passionate Pilgrim. But this was definitely without, even though there's a lot of squabbling over when this was copied out, it surely preceded The Passionate Pilgrim. There's no, and the attribution there, or it's considered to be by William Shakespeare. And here you can take a look at it. As you said, the different handwritings need to be studied. It has more than one handwriting in it. Mom says it's several handwritings, and you can certainly see that. Here's one attributed to an actor named John Bentley. And he's not a well-known actor, but apparently he was a very real person. They've looked at that. And he wrote poems that are several of them. The only place we have them is in Anne Cornwallis' notebook. He died in 1585, and he was a member of the acting troupe of, they think, one of Oxford's acting troupes from 1583 to 1585. So he has an Oxford connection there. Really, it's just devastating.
Bonner, I saw on one of your slides there that there were different Anne Cornwallises, right? Is there, like,
yes,
we know which one had this?
Yes. Yes. Well, I must have skipped something because I had it somewhere that there were 4 Anne Cornwallises. Where did I? It doesn't matter. Yes, but we're trying to figure out who actually copied this out. And it's possible, too, that several people did, because you've got different handwritings there. So there's still some room to do some very good work on this, on her notebook. But a lot of people think, including Charles Burrell, that the Latin poet and translator Thomas Watson was the purveyor of these poems. For one thing, he was well connected to Oxford, having dedicated his Hecatopathia to Oxford in 1582. And by the way, Mike Hyde, in a very fine article about the Calgary hounds that you see that pop up again within the emblem, and I'm not sure exactly if this has been cut off a little bit. But they are somewhere in some of these decorations for the Hecatopathia. Then they pop up in the first folio many, many years later. It's 1623.
Bonner, tell
Yes.
people what those hounds mean, please.
Calgary hounds are a mythical creature that is made up. It's got the face of a lion, and it has antlers and horns. I'm sorry I didn't write it out to be more detailed, but you can look it up. Calgary hounds are, and they were somewhere, I think. Oh yes, right down here. That's the antlers on the mythical creature.
But they're the symbol of the House of Oxford, correct?
Yeah. Oh yes. Yes.
Right?
That's yes. They are symbols
right?
of the house. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't set that out.
Oh, that's okay.
Very good. Yes, they're the only place they appear on the Oxford in Oxford's family, and so and then they also show up. I think Roger's written about this, so he'll correct me if I'm wrong. But in the book that was published and dedicated to Susan Vere and her husband, the Earl of Montgomery, about 1619, and I don't have the name of it right there in my memory, but I think the Calgary hounds, they use the same woodcut with the Calgary hounds, but here we only see the antlers in the first folio, and they appear with a Tempest, and I forget one other play, several times in the first folio, this particular woodcut. So it's definitely connecting into the Oxford family.
Bonner, I'm going to leap in with
Sure.
before people have a question here, and I don't want to miss.
Wonderful.
And because there was a traffic jam outside, we're going to go on a bit longer
Sure.
tonight.
That's- okay.
15 minutes, and you'll keep the doors open. But
I would, excuse me, just one more thing. I would sure
go
love
for
it if anybody has any clue. There were 4 Anne Cornwallises that were connected to the Cornwallis, to this family that lived in Fisher's Folly. That's who Oxford sold it to. And I've been trying to explore that a little bit more. Anybody who has any information on it, let's contact me and we'll work together on it.
okay, and that's related to the question, Bonner. Some people are passing me notes here saying, how could they get copies of your books that you've graciously
Send me your address and I'll mail it to you.
do people know an email address for you or how to get that?
Shall I?
We send it to the general information on the website. Would that do it for you, Bonner? And that
Yes, sure. Be glad to. It's actually in my book, in the introduction to my book, I put my email address, and every so often if something drops in from somebody somewhere, they have a suggestion, but
people can write to you in care of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship.
Oh, that's true. From that info, Shakespeare Oxford, that website, and then Earl will send it to me. So,
Bonner,
yes,
I have a question about the manuscripts. Because they're in different hands, and it's a binding question, it's a really techie down in the weeds binding question. If anyone else knows the answer to this, or maybe I'll just go to the folder and look.
Sure.
Were they individual leaves on which different hands does your mom know, had copied things out, and then they were taken and bound so that if it were 4 Annes, for example, imagine each one of them copying one of these poems, giving them to the youngest Anne for her book, right? And binding them all as one. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So to explain, it's not like it was a blank book of pages pre-bound, correct?
Yes.
Because
It was 19 leaves, 32.
Right. So these are individual. I mean, I think what people need to think about, at least the way I think of it, and I don't know if I'm right, is they're just like individual sheets of paper.
Somebody
Yes.
said it was a commonplace book. It was.
Was it right? But that which were collected and bound, as opposed to a notebook, which has, 26 or 36 blank pages where
Mhm.
she's filling this in. Does your mom have that info? Because that would mean, you know what I mean? If they're different hands, that would explain how they came to be in one book.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah,
That's a
somebody
very-
says different
Oh.
leaves from other people's books bound together.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
possible. There
Well,
were
I-
19, there were 32 poems on 19 leaves.
Okay.
So that's the information here.
And I want to do a quick summing up just so this key point doesn't get lost is, so this manuscript that contains poems by Edward de Vere and his mistress and Shakespeare of Stratford were all found, all belonged to somebody who lived in Oxford's house after Oxford lived there, and they had Thomas Watson both living there in their houses as a connection. So this is pretty much something that concretely ties the writings of Shakespeare to Edward de Vere's house.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this has been looked at. I don't recall the details, by somebody who knows the Oxford's earlier poems. This would have been a little bit later poem too, as what I'm getting from it. Would have, and because it would have been post his affair with Anne Vavasor, I would think. And it's also the last one in the book. Now the pages may not, but it does say finis at the end of it. So clearly it was meant to be the last one, I gather. But Dorothea is right. You must have separated pages, those 19 leaves, and then they're bound together. But it does. So I have read that it is very Oxfordian in many ways that work textually with Oxford's earlier poetry. That's more of his juvenilia. But to me, this would be a little bit more mature poem. So it's really important for us to know about it.
So somebody says, why was that poem attributed to William Shakespeare? And to recap, it wasn't in the manuscript book. It was only later that it was in the 1590s. So they sort of retrofitted that attribution back to the 1580s to this manuscript.
Yes. Halliwell Phillips thought it was copied out between 1585 and 1590. And he even published that. And then he realized, if we've got a Shakespeare here, if we've got a Shakespeare poem here, we're in trouble with the chronology of Shakespeare, because the Orthodox chronology doesn't get started until after 1590, really. And so it sort of blew a hole in the Orthodox dating system. And then he backtracked and tried to say could have been written out as late as 1595. But there's so much in it that is really clear. And Charles Burrell really went through a lot of details, and it's clear this was that Halliwell Phillips was initially correct from 1585 to 1590, and I don't know why why it keeps bouncing around, but yes, it should be. The argument should be persuasive.
Yeah. Bonner, somebody, just so you know, says Ruth Lloyd Miller's book is a fantastic resource.
Oh, how sweet. How kind.
Thanks, Bonner. That's
To say nothing for Bonner, she is a fantastic resource. Second generation.
Too dear.
Oh, you
Makes
are.
me very happy whenever I can get her work into where people can take a look at it. And
People are shouting out, "Thank you, Bonner! Thank you, Bonner!" I think we're going to have to close up in about 10 minutes or so. We're going on with the traffic jam, but
Can I just put a different spin on this?
Go
Just
for it.
because it makes it really interesting. Some people think that some of these folks who were there actually were pseudonyms for the Earl of Oxford. So if you take a look at a really fabulous book that's 20 years of research that Robert Prechter put together called Oxford's Voices, you will find lots and lots and lots of detail, more detail than you can absorb in a single sitting for sure. For me, Robert Greene just made me laugh. He made me laugh because he was so theatric and so over the top. And I began to look into him and I started to say, you know, there's some fishy stuff about him. I will give Bob Prechter credit for all of the research that he has done on this, but what I unearthed about him, and then Prechter went deeper and deeper and deeper, is that almost everything we know about Robert Greene comes from Robert Greene. He's hyperbolic, he lies, he backtracks, and he doesn't seem to be apologetic about it at all. Even Wikipedia says that his biographers have a chief problem with him about his veracity. He said he was from Norwich, and two of his biographers found two Norwich tradesmen named Greene, but neither had a son named Robert in his will. His chief biographer, Laurie Newcomb, admits, quote, events in Greene's youth may not be reliable, and that Greene is thought to have attended grammar school, but no record exists. I don't know if that sounds like anyone you know. He says he went to Cambridge. Scholars consider this strange, particularly if he transferred from St. John's to Tiny Clare College, which had like 9 students back in the day. He survived on air because his name is not listed in the Buttery record, so he didn't eat anything while he was there. Yet Newcomb says, quote, Greene's works evidence an inexhaustible linguistic facility, grounded in wide reading of the classics and extracurricular reading in the modern continental languages. Does that sound like somebody else that you might know? People notice Pandosto so resembles The Winter's Tale, that it seems that the bard was plagiarizing. And some people believe he wrote precursors to John, Titus, and the Henry IV, the Henry VI trio. And my favorite thing about him, he not only predicts his own death, he dies on cue from a surfeit of pickled herring and Rhenish wine. And in his last words, he does a chest-clutching goodbye to his maligned wife, Doll, before he lumbers off the stage. And after he dies, he comes back and writes again. So if we start to imagine that G-R-E-E-N, Greene, Vere in French, as in Edward de Vere, E for Edward, it is not impossible that Robert Greene is a pseudonym for Edward de Vere, writing the Malprolet pamphlets, writing all of the plays and books that he wrote as another character before Oxford switched over and became the character of William Shakespeare. You can believe it or not believe it, but when you start to have those thoughts about him and about Nashe, who Prechter says was the name of a porter at one of the colleges at Cambridge, they have very difficult backgrounds to locate, exceptionally difficult. It is another perspective on what Oxford may have been doing at Fisher's Folly. And we'll never know.
A line of exploration. There's disagreement. Somebody says there's newsletters, some rebuttals of Prechter. It won't be solved here.
It won't be solved here, but I just wanted to point it out. It's a way of thinking about it.
Well, Nina Green and Stephanie Hughes, who are very, very well accomplished scholars in this area, have both agreed with earlier written. I have a pamphlet 20 years ago that Stephanie wrote on Robert Greene as being a pseudonym for the Earl of Oxford. And I think it's a credible, of all the characters that might possibly from that Fisher's Folly group be most questionable, I think Robert Greene is the one that attracts the most attention.
He makes you smile, doesn't he, Earl? You've got a big grin on your face when you mention him.
He does.
We have to wrap up soon. We have to.
Okay.
But I did have a point that I thought earlier and I'd forgotten it, but I want to honor a scholar who's not with us now. Robert de Tobel, the German scholar, really believed that looking at all these pamphlets of all these people were the ones who would have known the secret. So he really felt it was important to decode all these coded pamphlets that this whole circle was writing, because that's where the truth probably was being revealed and people were talking about it in sort of coded ways. And we have a few minutes left. I just want to close with a toast to another Earl Showerman, because he's moving out of town and he won't be a regular. I hope he'll be a guest here at the Blue Boar Tavern, but he's got a lot of projects to work on. So talk to us, Earl, about what's going on.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a great pleasure. I've been here for over a year hanging out at the tavern, and I've enjoyed the best of the Blue Boar libations and the ales that have been served here of the highest quality. And those of you who have missed previous episodes, if you're a member of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, you can go to our website and find those previous episodes and enjoy the company and the discourse of a variety of other topics that we've covered. But I have to say that my colleagues in this, Tom and Bonner and Dorothea, and you, Jonathan, helping organize it is always very, very stimulating. I've learned a lot. Just tonight, I had to write down that whole commentary on Titus Andronicus. I'm working on the paper on Titus, and now I've got another lead I've got to follow. Thank you very much, Bonner. That's the point of these discourses, is that we have a chance to share ideas. And now that we have, chat going on, so we can get some feedback from those of you who are out there. It's a wonderful
lots of people
thing.
Raising their glasses here.
I'll raise your glasses to those of you who have joined
Michelle,
us at the Boar's Head over in recent months. It's been a great pleasure. I have a few other projects I need to pay more attention to. So I'm going to release my position for some other worthy individual who I no doubt will bring a new perspective, because we have so many different perspectives, as just this evening you've discovered. And if you're not a member of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and I appeal to you to please join so that you can see these episodes from the past and be part of our future discussion, because it's going to go on and it's going to be very, very interesting. And this year is a particularly great year to get involved. A month from now, Elizabeth Winkler's book, Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies, how the authorship question became the greatest taboo in English literature. This is going to be a wonderful year to be involved in this, read and get involved and join up and be part of it. And, I mentioned the Abraham Fleming manuscript that we're in hot pursuit of, that has missing, somewhere out there. In 2020, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship actually funded a research grant to Eddie Jolly to go to search the archives in England. And it was difficult. It was COVID time, so it was harder to find, access to these places. But the fellowship supports those kind of research efforts and original documentation. There's work going on at Audley End right now. So if you're not a member, please join. If you are a member or haven't renewed your membership this year, please do. And that would be so wonderful. And, if you really expect more to come from us and in the way of research and all that, make a contribution. We could always use extra funds to help with the kind of research that we have going here. And finally, I want to make sure that you all are personally invited to join the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship in New Orleans in November for our annual conference. Elizabeth Winkler will be our keynote speaker. We'll have presentations on the French Connection. We'll have presentations that relate to a variety of subjects. And I guarantee that any of you that come, I am collecting Mardi Gras beads. I have got hundreds of them, many more coming here. And you will be awarded a Mardi Gras beads, and you'll have the best time of your life. We're doing a river cruise with a jazz and Cajun meal and all this. So come on down and meet your colleagues, be with us during our annual gathering in New Orleans in November this year. I urge you to do that. If you have any questions about what's going on, if you need to reach Bonner for her books, you can write to me at info@shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org. I love this community of people. It's been a pleasure to be part of it. I am not going away. I will invite myself back on some occasion because I have some privileges apparently at this club. But I do think that we need to hear new voices and appreciate new perspectives. So I'm stepping back to allow some of that younger, newer energy to come through for us. So thank you so much for being part of this, Jonathan. You've been the best bartender I can imagine. I can't have had so much more fun here than at any other tavern I've been to in recent years.
Oh, good. Michelle Maycock says, will there be king cake in? And she also says she's got her De Vere Society grant to go to England to look at more De Vere annotated books.
See, De Vere Society is another organization you might want to join, but please, Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, we do need memberships. We do rely on that. We're a total volunteer organization, except for our editors, and we're a nonprofit. please, give us your resources. Send us your Tempest tossed ideas. Thank you.
Okay. And before we wrap up, one more question or issue came up. Christopher Paul, I'm thrilled to see his name show up here because he's one of the researchers that I most go, if his name's on it, it's going to be good. He says some folks miss that the poem in the Cornwallis commonplace book that Bonner talked about was first in print attributed to Shakespeare in the 1599 Passionate Pilgrim. Some people didn't catch that.
Didn't catch
So
it.
that is like the key
Good.
bit.
That's a very important point to really have nailed down.
Yeah.
The ironclad.
So somebody would question, any chance for an email of the book Bonner as in Wales, UK? Many thanks. Loving the chat, someone says. And on that, I think we need to wrap up. In the chat there, I jumped in and put the Shakespeare Fellowship email address. I hope people can see that. Earl, thank you so much.
Oh, you're all welcome. Thank you again. It's been a
Dorothea,
great pleasure.
Bonner. Thank you, everybody.
It was fun. Happy
That's great.
birthday.
Thanks for joining in.
Birthday.
Bye, everyone.
Happy birthday,
Oxford.
Edward de Vere. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.